The twin suns were falling low in the alien sky, their red and gold light turning the desert into a sea of fire. The desert stretched forever with no end in sight. Only sand dunes rolling like waves. A single ship rested on the hot ground, shining with the mark of an ancient house. It was the ship of Baron Kor, one of the most feared lords in the Empire. Inside the ship, silence ruled except for the sound of heavy boots. Baron Kor walked slowly down the ramp, his long shadow cutting across the sand. Behind him, a girl limped forward, her small steps uneven, her legs weak. This girl was his daughter, Lyra, a child with sharp eyes but a crippled body. The Baron's face was hard as stone. He looked down at her with no kindness, only cold judgment for him. Strength was honor and weakness was shame. His empire was built on fear, and fear did not forgive weakness. Lyra tried to keep up with his steps, but she stumbled. The sand burned her hands as she fell. She looked up at him with pleading eyes, but the Baron did not move to help. He only waited silent, as if watching a servant, not his own child. When she finally reached him, he pointed to the desert. His voice was deep and final. "This is where you stay." Lyra froze, her heart pounding. She could not believe what she had heard. "Father, please." Her voice was small. "There is nothing for you in my house," he said. "You bring shame with every step. The Empire cannot see weakness." His words cut sharper than any blade. Lyra's chest tightened, her throat dry. She had always known he was cold, but never this cruel. She thought of the times she sat alone in the grand halls, waiting for him to look at her. He never did. Now she understood why. The Baron turned away, his long cloak brushing the sand. The desert wind picked up, whispering like ghosts around them. Lyra's heart screamed for him to stop, to look back, but she knew he would not. Her legs shook as she tried to follow him. She reached for his cloak, but he pulled it away without a glance. "You will not survive," she said with trembling lips. He answered, "Better the desert takes you than the Empire see my weakness." Those were his last words to her. The ramp closed. The engines roared. Sand flew everywhere, stinging her face. The ship lifted into the air, the shadow of its wings covering her like a dark storm. She raised her arm, reaching out, but the ship did not stop. Higher and higher it went, until it was only a small black shape against the red suns. Then it vanished into the endless sky, leaving only silence. Lyra stood alone in the burning desert. Her chest ached, her eyes heavy with tears. The ground under her feet seemed to move like waves. The heat pressed down on her, making her body weaker, but inside her heart, something else stirred. A small flame of anger, of pain, of defiance. She whispered to herself, "I am not weak. I am not broken." Her voice was quiet, but the desert carried it, as if the sands themselves listened. Night came fast on this world. The two suns fell and the sky turned dark. The desert grew cold, the silence heavier. Lyra curled herself against a rock, shivering. Her body hurt, but her eyes stayed open. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound like a threat. She thought of her father's face, hard, proud, without mercy. But she also thought of the stars above, endless and bright. She had always dreamed of flying to them. Maybe one day she would, if only she survived this night. The desert whispered again, a sound like footsteps far away. Lyra lifted her head, her heart beating fast. Something was out there, moving closer. It could be a beast. It could be death, or it could be something else. Something unexpected she did not know yet. But one thing was certain. Her story was not ending here. It was only beginning. The night was long and cold. Lyra lay against the rock, her small body shivering under the alien stars. Every sound in the desert made her heart race, distant roars, shifting sands, the hiss of strange insects. She had no food, no water, only fear, but fear could not last forever. Her eyes stayed open until she saw it, a faint light moving in the distance. At first she thought it was a trick of the desert, but the light grew brighter, steady, real. Lyra forced herself to stand, her weak legs shaking. She pressed her back against the rock, trying to hide. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "The desert will take you." Maybe this was the desert's way. Maybe death was coming. The light came closer, revealing a figure, not a beast. Not an alien soldier, but a man. A human, tall, wrapped in worn clothes, his face half hidden by a scarf. He carried a small lantern in one hand and a pack on his back. Lyra had seen humans before in the Empire's markets. They were always slaves, workers, forgotten. But this one walked free. Alone across the desert, why was he here? The man stopped when he noticed her. His eyes widened with shock. For a moment he thought she was a mirage, but no, she was real. A young alien girl abandoned in the sand. "What are you doing here?" His voice was gentle. Lyra tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Only a whisper escaped her lips. "Water." The man quickly opened his pack, pulled out a flask and handed it to her. She drank greedily, the cool liquid saving her from collapse. Her hands shook as she held it. When she finished, she looked at him with wide eyes. Why help me?" she asked. The man crouched down, meeting her gaze. "Because you need help," he said simply. Lyra did not understand. No one in her world helped without a reason. Her own father had left her to die. Why would a stranger show kindness? Still, the human offered food, small dry rations from his pack. She hesitated, then took a bite. The taste was rough, but it filled her empty stomach. Tears stung her eyes, not just from hunger, but from relief. The man studied her carefully. "You're not like the others I've seen," he said. "Your legs. You're hurt." Lyra looked down, ashamed. "Yes, broken," she whispered. "My father said I am useless." The man frowned, his eyes hardening. "No," he said firmly. "You are not useless, you are alive, and that means you are strong." Lyra's chest tightened at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that. The human introduced himself as Kale, a wanderer. He had traveled across many deserts, from one forgotten world to another. He was searching for something, maybe freedom, maybe meaning, but tonight, he had found her. Lyra did not trust easily. But Kale's eyes carried no lies, only tired truth. Still, her voice trembled as she asked, "Will you leave me too?" Kale shook his head. "Not if you want me to stay." The desert wind howled again, carrying danger in its voice. Kale looked around, scanning the dunes. "This place is not safe," he said. "We need shelter before the night creatures wake." He lifted Lyra gently, carrying her in his arms. At first she struggled, pride burning in her heart, but exhaustion won, and she rested against him. For the first time in her life she felt protected. They reached a small cave in the rocks, hidden from the open desert. Inside, Kale lit a small fire with careful hands. The warmth spread, pushing back the cold. Lyra sat close, staring at the flames. She felt like she was staring at hope itself. Kale sat beside her, silent for a long time. Finally, he asked, "Who left you here?" Lyra's throat tightened, but she spoke. "My father." "The Baron." Kale's eyes darkened. He had heard the name before, a name of fear. The Baron was cruel, a master of slaves, a breaker of worlds, and now he understood. This child had been thrown away like broken glass, but in her eyes he saw something unbroken, a spark, small but fierce. Lyra looked into the fire, her voice quiet. "I wanted to fly ships. I wanted to see the stars. But he said I am nothing." Kale placed a hand on her shoulder. Steady and strong. "You are not nothing," he said. "You will see the stars, I promise you." The flames crackled. Shadows danced on the cave walls. Lyra felt her heart beating faster. For the first time, she believed his words. Somewhere inside, hope was being born. But far away in the desert, unseen eyes were already watching. Hunters moved silently, following the trail. The Baron had abandoned his daughter, but he was not finished with her story yet. The fire in the cave burned low, its glow painting soft light on the walls. Lyra sat close to the flames, her small hands stretched toward the warmth. Kale, the human wanderer, rested a little farther back, sharpening a simple blade against a stone. The desert outside howled like a living beast. But in this cave there was a fragile peace. Lyra's eyes followed the sparks as Kale worked. Her voice broke the silence, soft but curious. "Why are you here? Humans do not walk the deserts alone." Kale looked at her, his eyes tired but kind. "I travel because I cannot stay," he answered. "There are places where humans are slaves, and places where they are forgotten. So I walk between them, looking for something better." Lyra lowered her gaze. She had seen humans in the Empire, heads bowed, voices silent. She never thought one would look at her as an equal. Her heart wondered, why did he not leave me like the others would have? Kale spoke again. "You said you wanted to fly ships." Lyra's face lit with a fragile glow. "Yes. Ever since I was small, I wanted to see the stars, but my father, he said I was broken. He said the stars are not for the weak." Her voice cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. She quickly brushed them away, ashamed. Kale placed his blade aside and leaned forward. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked. Lyra shook her head, confused. I see someone who is still alive, even when the desert tried to kill her. I see someone stronger than most soldiers I've met. His words struck her like light in the darkness. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Her father's voice always cut her down. But Cale's voice built her up, Lyra whispered. You really think I am strong? Cale nodded, firm and sure. You don't need legs to reach the stars. You need courage, and that you already have for the first time. Lyra smiled, small, uncertain, but real. The fire crackled between them, sealing an invisible bond. A bond not of blood, but of choice. The night passed slowly. Lyra drifted into sleep, her head resting against Cale's arm. He did not move, did not push her away. Instead, he kept watch, his eyes scanning the cave's mouth for danger. Something inside him shifted. He had been wandering alone for so long, but now he had someone to protect when dawn broke. The desert turned golden under the twin suns. Cale helped Lyra outside, carrying her pack and guiding her steps. The desert was vast, merciless, but together they began to walk. Cale supported her when she stumbled, and Lyra pointed out paths between the dunes. Her people might have abandoned her, but her mind was sharp. She knew how to read the desert winds, how to find shade where none seemed to exist. At midday, a sandstorm rolled across the horizon. Cale pulled Lyra close, covering her with his scarf. The storm hit like a wall, blinding and wild. Lyra coughed and clung to him, her heart pounding. Cale held her tight, pushing forward step by step until he found shelter under a broken arch of stone. When the storm finally passed, they collapsed in the shade. Gasping for breath, Lyra laughed suddenly. A soft, shaky laugh. Cale looked at her in surprise. Why are you laughing? He asked. Because, she said between breaths. I thought the desert would kill me again, but it didn't. Maybe I'm stronger than I thought. Cale smiled. A rare thing for him. Yes, you are, he said. That night, as they made camp, Lyra told him stories of her childhood. How she used to sneak into the hangars to watch the ships rise into the sky. How she dreamed of flying far away. Her words carried both pain and hope. Cale listened, every word sinking deep. In return, he told her of Earth, his lost home, how the rivers ran like silver, how forests whispered with life. Lyra listened with wide eyes, as if she could see it all in her mind for the first time. She felt like she belonged somewhere, not in her father's empire, but here, beside this human. The bond between them grew stronger with every word. Every step, they were no longer two lost souls in the desert. They were something more, companions, allies, almost family. But shadows moved in the distance, silent and patient. The Baron's hunters were closer now, their ships cutting across the dunes. They carried orders: find the girl, erase the shame, kill the human. Neither Lyra nor Cale knew it yet. But the desert would soon test their bond with blood and fire. The desert was a cruel teacher. Every step tested Cale and Lyra. Every breath burned their lungs. The suns blazed high in the sky, turning the sand into a sea of fire. But still they walked one step at a time, side by side. Cale carried most of the weight, water, food and weapons, but Lyra carried something else, something unseen, hope and the sharp mind of a survivor. Though her legs were weak, her thoughts were strong, and in the desert, cleverness could mean the difference between life and death. By the third day, their food was almost gone. Cale frowned as he counted the rations. 2 meals left, he muttered. Lyra's stomach growled, but she forced a small smile. We will find more. The desert hides treasures if you know where to look. She pointed toward a cluster of sharp rocks half buried in the sand. Cale followed her lead. There, under the shade, they found roots growing deep, holding drops of water. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Cale looked at her with respect. You've done this before, he said. Lyra nodded. I watched the servants when they searched for water. I may not walk well, but I always watched that night. They lit a small fire in another cave. Cale roasted a thin strip of dried meat. While Lyra studied the stars, she traced shapes with her fingers, whispering names of constellations she had learned long ago. Her voice was soft, filled with longing. I used to dream of touching those lights, she said. Cale looked at her, his face serious. Then hold on to that dream, Lyra. Because a dream is stronger than the desert. But the desert was not finished with them. The next day, a shadow passed overhead. Something moving in the sky. Cale froze, his hand on his blade. Lyra's eyes widened. It wasn't a ship this time, it was a beast. A giant winged predator with scales like iron. The creature swooped down, its scream tearing through the dunes. Cale grabbed Lyra, pulling her behind a rock. The beast's claws smashed into the sand, sending dust flying. Cale drew his blade, but it was small compared to the monster. Lyra's mind raced. "Cale, the rocks!" she shouted, pointing to a sharp overhang above the beast. Cale understood instantly. While the beast turned its head toward them, Cale darted to the rocks. He struck the weak points, loosening the sand that held them. The overhang collapsed with a thunderous crash. The rock slammed onto the beast's wings, pinning it to the ground. It thrashed and roared, but it could not rise. Cale ran back to Lyra, grabbing her hand. "Smart thinking," he said, breathless. Lyra's lips trembled, but she smiled faintly. "I told you, I am not weak." They hurried away before the beast could free itself. Every heartbeat was a reminder of how close they had come to death. But Cale was proud, and Lyra felt a fire inside her chest. For the first time, she had saved someone, not just been saved. As night fell, the desert grew colder. They wrapped themselves in cloaks. Sharing warmth, Cale stared into the fire, his voice low. "Lyra, you have more strength than your father will ever see. Do not let his words define you." Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Do you really believe that?" "With everything I am," Cale answered. Silence settled between them, not heavy but strong. They no longer felt like strangers. They were partners. Bound by survival, bound by trust. But beyond the dunes, danger crept closer. The Baron's hunters had landed, their ships leaving trails of smoke in the horizon. They moved like shadows, armored and armed, their orders clear. Bring the girl back, alive or dead. Erase the human. Lyra and Cale did not yet know they were being tracked. But the desert gave warnings, strange footprints in the sand. The echo of distant engines Lyra noticed first, her sharp eyes scanning the dunes. "Kyle," she whispered. "We are not alone." Kyle's hand went to his blade. His body tense, the bond between them was strong now. Strong enough to face the desert, but soon they would face something far worse. The wrath of an empire. The desert stretched silent under the burning suns, but silence did not mean safety. Shadows moved across the dunes. Hunters, armored and armed, their black ships cut across the horizon, leaving trails of smoke in the sky. At their head was a commander with eyes as cold as steel. He carried the Baron's order carved into his mind. Find the girl, erase the shame, kill the human. In the cave where Cale and Lyra rested, the fire burned low. Lyra leaned against the wall, tracing stars in the dust with her finger. Cale sharpened his blade in silence. He had traveled too long not to notice danger. The desert carried whispers, the low hum of engines, the faint tremble of distant machines. He looked at Lyra. "We must move," he said. Her head lifted, eyes wide. "The hunters?" Kyle nodded, his jaw tight. "They are close. Your father does not want you forgotten. He wants you erased." The words cut her like ice. Her chest ached, but deep inside, she was not surprised. The Baron's cruelty knew no end. She whispered, almost to herself. "He will not rest until I'm gone." Cale's hand rested on her shoulder, steady and warm. "Then we make him fail," he said simply. It was not a grand speech, but his voice carried iron. Lyra felt strength rising inside her, strength she had not known before. They left the cave before dawn, walking through the shadows of the dunes, moving fast. Cale carried supplies while Lyra guided him through narrow paths she remembered from childhood maps. Each step was a gamble. One mistake, and the hunters would catch them. By midday they saw it. Black ships landing far in the distance, dozens of armored hunters poured out, their weapons glinting under the suns. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "They will find us," she said, fear trembling in her voice. Cale scanned the dunes, his eyes sharp. "Not if we make the desert fight for us." That night they set traps. Lyra's clever mind worked quickly. She showed Cale how to use the dunes against their enemies. Loose sand that would collapse under heavy boots, sharp rocks hidden under shallow cover. Cale smiled at her plans. "You've got the mind of a soldier," he said. Lyra's eyes shone with pride. "No, I have the mind of a survivor." The hunters came at dawn, dark figures moving across the sand like a tide of death. Cale and Lyra watched from the shadows of a broken ridge. The first wave fell into the traps. Sand swallowed them, Rocks cut through armor. The hunters roared in anger, firing blindly into the dunes. Cale leapt forward, striking fast and hard. His blade flashed in the sun, taking down 2 hunters before they even raised their guns. Lyra, hidden on higher ground, shouted warnings. "Left, Cale! Behind you!" Her sharp eyes saved him again and again, but there were too many. The hunters pushed forward. Relentless, Cale fought like fire, but sweat burned his eyes, his arms grew heavy. Lyra felt panic rising. She grabbed a fallen hunter's weapon, heavy in her hands, but she aimed with steady breath. A shot rang out, striking true, saving Cale's life. For a moment silence fell. Kyle turned, shock in his eyes. Lyra held the weapon tight, her hands shaking. "I will not be weak," she whispered. Kyle gave her a nod, fierce and proud. "You are not weak." But the battle was far from over. The hunters fell back suddenly, regrouping, and then across the horizon another ship descended, larger, darker. Its engines screamed as it landed, blasting sand into the air. The ramp lowered, and out stepped the Baron himself. His armor glinted like obsidian, his eyes burning with cold fire. He looked upon the battlefield, his fallen hunters, the human, and his daughter standing with a weapon in her hands. Disgust twisted his face. "You," he said, his voice carrying across the dunes. "You shame me even now." Lyra's heart pounded. She had dreamed of this moment when he might look at her, speak to her, acknowledge her, but not like this. Not with hate in his eyes. Cale stepped forward, blade ready. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The Baron's laugh was cruel and deep. "A human dares to stand in my way? You are nothing but dirt." Kyle's grip tightened, his eyes hard. Sometimes dirt can choke the roots of a great tree. The hunters closed in again, circling them both. The desert air burned with tension. Father and daughter stood on opposite sides, the human between them a shield, a flame. The Baron's voice thundered. "This ends tonight. The girl dies, and the shame with her." Lyra raised her weapon, her hand shaking but her eyes blazing. "No, Father," she said, her voice steady for the first time. "This time, I will not bow." The desert was silent for a heartbeat. Sand drifted in the air, glowing under the twin suns. Hunters surrounded Cale and Lyra, their weapons pointed, their armor dark as night. And at the center stood the Baron, tall and cruel, his cloak whipping in the wind. Lyra's heart pounded like a drum, her father's eyes cut into her, sharp as blades. He did not see a daughter, only a wound to his pride. "You should have died in the sand," he thundered. "Instead, you crawl back, carried by a filthy human." Cale stepped forward, blade gleaming in the sunlight. He placed himself between Lyra and the Baron. "Say what you want about me," Kyle said, his voice calm but strong. "But she is not filth, and she is not broken." The Baron laughed, a sound cold as ice. "You dare teach me about worth? You, a slave breed, a wanderer of dead worlds?" His hand rose, and the hunters advanced. Weapons humming with deadly energy, Lyra gripped the stolen rifle in her trembling hands. Her body was weak, but her will was fire. She aimed, steadying her breath. "Cale," she whispered, "we fight together." The hunters rushed forward. Cale moved like lightning, striking the first with his blade. Armor cracked. Sparks flew. Lyra fired, her shot piercing the sandstorm of chaos. A hunter fell, smoke rising from his chest. The battle exploded across the dunes. Cale slashed, dodged, and rolled, his body a blur of survival. Every time he faltered, Lyra's sharp voice called out, "Behind you! Left! Duck!" Her eyes, her mind, became his second weapon. The hunters pressed harder, surrounding them. Kyle's arms grew heavy, sweat pouring down his face. But Lyra's fire grew brighter. She dragged herself to higher ground, firing down from the rocks, each shot true, each shot saving Cale from death. The desert itself seemed to roar with them. Sand sprayed with every blast. Heat burning the air, hunters fell one by one until the survivors hesitated, fear in their eyes. Cale stood bleeding but unbroken. Lyra's weapon shook in her hands, smoke rising from its barrel. The Baron stepped forward, fury in his gaze. Pathetic, he spat. You think you are warriors? You are insects under my boot. He raised his hand, a weapon unfolding from his gauntlet, glowing with deadly energy. Cale pushed Lyra behind him. Stay back, he said. But Lyra shook her head. No, Cale, not this time. The Baron struck, a blast of burning light tearing through the sand. Cale dove aside, rolling, his blade flashing. He struck, sparks flying as his sword clashed against the Baron's armor. The force threw him back. But he rose again, teeth gritted. The Baron towered over him. Do you think you can kill me, human? Cale's voice was steady. I don't need to kill you. I just need to show her the truth. Lyra's eyes widened. She looked at her father, not as a child craving love, but as a soul seeing clearly he was not strong, he was empty. His power was built on fear, and fear was breaking. The Baron turned his wrath on her. You will bow, Lyra. Even crippled, you are mine. Lyra raised her weapon, her hands shaking but her voice steel. I am not yours, she said. I am not broken. I am enough. The hunters hesitated, watching her. Her courage cracked their loyalty. They had feared the Baron, but now they saw his own daughter defy him. Whispers spread through the ranks like wildfire. Cale saw it too. Look at her, he shouted to them. She is stronger than him, stronger than fear. Follow her courage, not his cruelty. The Baron roared, blind with rage. He swung at Cale, but Cale caught the blow, his blade locking against the gauntlet. The clash echoed like thunder. Lyra aimed, her finger steady on the trigger. One shot, one chance. The blast struck true, shattering the Baron's weapon. The energy exploded in a storm of sparks, throwing him to his knees. For the first time, the great Baron bled. He looked up at his daughter, his face twisted with shock. You dare. Lyra's voice was clear as the desert wind. I dare, she said. She lowered the rifle but did not look away. The hunters did not move to help their master. Their eyes had changed. The Baron tried to rise, but his strength was broken. His empire of fear cracked in that moment. Cale stood beside Lyra, wounded but unbowed. Together they had faced the storm. Together they had stood against an empire. The desert was silent again. But this silence was different. It was the silence of victory, the silence before a new dawn. The desert was still, the battle was over. But the air still carried the scent of smoke and scorched sand. Hunters stood frozen in the dunes, their weapons lowered. Their eyes no longer fixed on their master. The Baron knelt in the sand, his once proud armor cracked, his gauntlet broken, his face pale with rage and disbelief. Lyra stood tall, or as tall as her frail body would allow. The rifle hung heavy in her hands, her arms shaking from exhaustion. But her eyes were fire for the first time. She was not the broken daughter, not the shame of a house. She was Lyra, survivor of the desert, and everyone could see it. Cale moved beside her, bleeding but unbowed. His body was scarred by the fight, but his spirit was iron. He kept his blade ready. Though the hunters no longer threatened, they were watching, waiting, not for the Baron, but for her. The Baron raised his head, his voice raw. You are nothing without me, he spat. You live because I allowed it. You breathe because I ignored you. Lyra's voice cut through the silence, steady and strong. No, father, I live because I chose to. I survived when you left me to die. And I found someone who saw me not as broken, but as whole. She turned her eyes to Cale, and for a moment the desert felt warmer. The Baron roared, trying to rise, but his body failed him. His hunters looked at him with doubt for the first time. Their faith was breaking, the cracks spreading like glass. One hunter stepped forward, his weapon lowering to the sand. Another followed, then another. They bowed their heads not to the Baron, but to Lyra, the girl who had defied death, the girl who stood unbroken. The Baron's voice trembled with fury. You betray me? For her? For a cripple? But no answer came, only silence, and silence was louder than any blade. Cale placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. It is done, he said softly, but Lyra shook her head no. It is beginning, she stepped forward, weak legs trembling, but each step filled with purpose. She looked down at her father. All her life she had wanted his love, his approval, a single kind word. But now she saw him clearly. Not a father, not a giant, only a man, small and hollow inside. Her voice carried across the dunes. You tried to bury me in the desert, but I rose. You tried to break me, but I became stronger. You said I would never touch the stars. But one day I will, the hunters bowed deeper, their loyalty shifting like the sands themselves. The Baron's empire had ended not by an army, not by a war, but by the courage of the one he had abandoned. Cale helped her turn away, his arm steady around her. She leaned into him, exhausted but alive. The desert stretched wide before them, endless and bright under the twin suns. It was no longer a prison, it was a path as they walked. Lyra looked up at the sky. The stars were faint in daylight, but she imagined them waiting. Worlds beyond worlds, waiting for her to see them. Her dream was no longer impossible. It was only the beginning of her journey. Cale broke the silence, his voice calm. What will you do now, Lyra? She smiled, tired but certain. I will live, Cale, I will fly. And I will prove that no one is broken, not if they choose to rise, Cale nodded, his lips curving into the faintest smile. Then I will walk beside you until you reach those stars. The desert wind carried their voices away. Behind them, the Baron sat in silence, his empire gone, his power shattered. The hunters turned their backs on him, following instead the girl who had shown them courage. Ahead of them, the horizon glowed with light. Every step forward was a step into a new dawn. The desert had tried to take her. Her father had tried to erase her, but Lyra walked on, hand in hand with the human who saw her worth, and together, they would write a story no one could ever silence. The stars were waiting, and Lyra was ready.